Welcome to today's episode. Here's the question to get us thinking. The capacity we start the day with, how does it impact other people around us that we come in contact with? So if we start with holding a lot of capacity, how does that affect our children, our coworkers? Low capacity, how does that impact them? I am so excited for this episode because we have Jaton White. Jaton, please introduce yourself to the listeners.
I am Jaton White, director of Community Wellness at the Northside Achievement Zone. And surprisingly, I'm in my 11th year there this year.
Wow. It's been 11 years already.
It's been 11 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah. This is amazing to have you on our show today, Jaton. Welcome, welcome. Now, I want to back up, Jody, in case we have some new listeners, because, you know, we're gaining listeners all the time. Mm-hmm. What do y'all mean by capacity? What do you mean by capacity?
Well, being I have Jaton, who's an expert, I'm going to have Jaton answer it first.
I'm going to yield on the expert, but definitely did a little homework to prepare myself to be here today. And, of course, that started with the Webster Dictionary lookup, right?
And it would for Jaton.
Absolutely. Right. Listen, Webster is my go-to. Yeah, Webster or my mom.
Me and Mr. Webster don't get along. We had a breakup many years ago. But, yes. So
in the past few years, he's been a little indecisive. So I could see how you could want to break that.
Right.
Yeah. But the Webster definition says capacity means the maximum amount that something can contain equals the amount that something can produce. So my perspective is we can increase our capacity to produce when we invest in learning ourselves.
Wow.
Invest in learning ourselves.
Invest in learning ourselves.
That's pretty much the mission of our podcast, is gaining new awareness. So learning more about our experiences.
And others.
Yeah.
Yes.
You got it. And then showing up with more capacity.
Yeah, you have more capacity. Your energy moves the space differently.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So for listeners who've been with us, because we're gaining new listeners all the time, in episode 1, I talked about how I went to a condo that was specifically made for a left-handed person, and I'm a right-handed person. And I didn't have awareness, and I did not show up with capacity. And what happens when we don't have awareness or are willing to lean in and gain awareness, then we often, when we see something that's outside of our experience, we'll often not just react to it, but we might even then judge it. And it happens in that split second. So like we walked down the hallway and I was like, they put your door on wrong. Right away is wrong. Not, maybe there's a different experience going on here, Jody. No. And then when we got in, the light wasn't where as a right-handed person it should be. So I was frustrated, and I'm sure I made a sarcastic remark there as well. And so what happened is, after going to that condo a couple times, my friend's like, hey, you want to come over? And I'm like, no. I'll meet you somewhere where stuff works for me. But that is me operating out of a low capacity. Mm-hmm. What happens is when we don't gain awareness and lean in those moments, we start to make our experiences and ourselves smaller. And so I didn't want to lean in and experience, being quote unquote inconvenienced again. So I chose to make my experience smaller or reinforce what I already know.
Yeah. That's good. I'm curious as to, you had the opportunity to say no so that you could go back to something that made you feel comfortable. How many times does a left-handed person have the opportunity to say, I want to do something different that works for me? That was good. I like the way you said that.
Ooh, now see, you just put me in my place. Ooh, that was deep. Because left-handed people don't get the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to do it that way. Yeah. If they do, as right-handed people, we're going to be like, seriously, we have to adjust to you, not thinking that they've been adjusting all day.
Speaking about capacity, right?
Exactly. And so in those moments when we don't have awareness, and rather than hitting the pause button, leaning in to try to gain awareness so that we could maybe build our capacity, what happens is when we don't have that awareness and we don't gain that, don't have that awareness, then we operate out of a diminished capacity. And that's where we start doing what we talked about before, is either or. Well, either your experience is valid or mine is valid.
Yep.
Either your way is right or my way is right. Whereas we build capacity, we gain more awareness of our experience and how we show up and how other people are experiencing things. It lends itself to both and. There's a both and. It's not about right, wrong, better, worse, but it's a both and. You guys know I do a lot of work with corporations and human services, and I was in Denver working with the Department of Human Services, and a person came up to me because they had this question during my presentation. They said, Jody, I do house visits in an impoverished neighborhood. And I was in this particular house where the people there earned a low income. And there was not much in the house. And the participant is like, trust me, there was not much in the house. But there was a big screen TV.
Okay.
And this was like 10 years ago when not everybody had one of those.
Right.
And so the participant was leaning in because they're like, look, I didn't lean in at the time. I looked at the big TV and there's nothing else in the house. And I'm like, what the heck, you know? And then what the heck, I ain't even got that, right? That's quick judgment. So reaction, because it's outside their experience, and that judgment. But came up to me about midday and said, hey, now I'm gaining awareness of what that was about. Like because we had talked about economic class and how that leads to two different experiences sometimes. And they said, I didn't realize growing up middle class how much I was taught, trained to look at the future. You know, from the time I was little, what are we doing this weekend? What are you going to do when you get big? Where are you going to go to school? It was always about the future. Even our vacations were like, oh, next summer we get to go to Disney, or, oh, we get to go camping. And so realizing that I have a future story, the participant said, but that having a future story and having an income, and they're like, we weren't rich or anything, you know, but it gave me and my family different ways to take a break. Whereas we talked about that day, if you grow up and you don't have enough to get your basic needs met, you know, you get into survival mode. And survival pulls you all about the right now, to think all about right now. And so your world becomes very much about the right now and concrete. And so the way that middle class has the luxury, like right-handed, middle class has the luxury of taking a break in the right now, or taking a break via a future story. Where
interesting.
Yes. So like I always say this, one of the examples I used that the participant resonated with, I said, hey, if your supervisor really ticks you off, many of us are in our head doing this, really, 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 well, in 2 weeks I go on vacation, right? And so we're escaping this stress with a future story.
Right.
But what we talked about is if you're in survival mode and it's all about the right now, you need concrete breaks throughout your day in order to survive. And some of the things that you can do is you can watch TV, and you can eat, and you can smoke, and you can, and so all of a sudden participants were starting to look at like, oh, yeah, when I go through the neighborhood, everybody has, you know, so many people have smokes. And so many people have big screen TVs, and they're like, the participants are like, I was judging it and reacting to it. Now that I get understanding about it, and they were great. They were all leaned in. I love working with Denver County Human Services. They're always leaning in and trying to gain that awareness. And so that participant came up and said, I think I've increased my capacity today.
Wow.
Because I am going
Definitely.
to show up differently
Definitely.
to my house visits. Because and the participant was very honest, said, I ain't gonna lie, the whole time I was there, half my brain was distracted on that big screen TV and why they got it and I ain't, right? And so I wasn't fully present and fully listening. But now that I have that understanding and that awareness, and then they said it's a both and. Both the way I took a break in life is you know, gave me a break, and this is giving that person a break. And the participant even added learning, saying, you know what, also that TV is daycare. And I said, oh yeah, absolutely. You put in your kid's favorite movie and they're content, and you get 5 minutes just to decompress. So that big screen TV can become adults' vacations, it becomes daycare, it becomes many ways to take an escape.
Wow, Jaton, what are you thinking?
I mean, that's powerful when I think about a way to get to know yourself is based on some of those triangles, right? When I think about, as you were talking, I was thinking about how my own triangles have flipped in my way of choice, right? And, you know, through our experience, I've known you a long time now, I've learned that I've had some of these triangles that were actually upwardly facing and just wasn't aware of, which is thus my comment a few minutes ago. Some of us have these choices and you don't even know it. But, you know, trauma and toxic stress will have you feeling or believing even that you don't have choice, even though you've done some things to change your reality or giving yourself the opportunity to grow. And so I want to just point that out in to the listening audience that it's a journey,
Yes.
right? There's no arrival. You've got to always be constantly learning about yourself, more importantly, and in that those stressors or triggers or those traumatic events and how they're impacting you first. But then how are you carrying them into your other relationships throughout the day?
And when you think about relationships and you think about all of us who are parents, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's really interesting how, as you all are talking, how I'm thinking about like my parenting and how this is how building capacity. How I did not have capacity for that first child.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Ditto, check.
But before we go there, I want, because you're bringing in new terminology we haven't used before.
Yeah.
Like the trauma and the triggers. And I do like the one piece I relate to the story is, if you would have told me when I first went to that condo that was made for a left-handed person that, Jody, you have a choice on how you respond or react to this, I would have smacked you. You'd be like, I freaking got a choice. This is wrong and it's stupid, right? And so sometimes we don't even see that we have a choice because we're so unaware and just reactive. That I liked with the piece that you said is that that's why this is a journey. Is like in the moment we might be unaware and reactive, but later I can hit the pause button and I can reflect on it and I can gain that insight. But talk to me more about when you said the trauma triggers or some of the terminology you use, because listeners and I may not all understand.
Well, trauma's overused, so I ain't gonna spend much time on this. But trauma is anything that happens, it's too much, too fast, too soon on anybody. Triggers are a response to a traumatic event. And I don't always mean trauma when I'm saying it as big T trauma. So death and big accidents, those are big T trauma. But there's smaller traumas that take place every single day, right? Throughout our days, and sometimes there are other folks' experiences, and we kind of get intertwined with them. Those things can lead us, if we don't work through them. And an example I give is there's a book, and I'm not gonna remember, but it's Zebra Lost His Stripes, or Why the Zebra Has Stripes. So it talks about animals in particular. They actually shake off their trauma. Like my dog literally is a big goofy guy, and I love him. He falls around the house all the time, right? He'll get up, fall down the stairs, get up, shake himself off. He's ready to play again. He can shake that off. He's processed what's happened to him. He's able to move on. We don't do that. And instead those triggers and those stressors or that trauma gets embedded in our body. And our body will sometimes get activated out of protective mode when something seems like it's something in the past that's happening right now. So as an example, a small trauma, because I don't want to traumatize anybody listening. A small trauma was when I was in your class. A small trigger. I was in Jody's class the first time I met Jody. It was a long time ago. And I learned in there, I think it was the first time you used the triangle work too, because I had triangles in front of me, and I realized after looking at the page, I was middle class. I had a meltdown. An absolute meltdown. I had to walk out.
I remember.
She was worried. Right, but I hadn't worked through some of those things. Like, that's a small trauma. Though I was triggered because I didn't know who I was in those moments. Like, who am I? All this time, I thought by blackness meant poverty, that I was never going to achieve any type of wealth or have any future story. But I was wrong. And in fact, when I called my mother, who may listen to this podcast, she was like, "Fool, I worked all my life for you to be middle class. What are you talking about? We done had cars, own houses. You can go to college. You've been middle class, right? You had choices, but unaware because of my own personal biases that I've adopted, right? Through that journey, now I have to decide as an adult now, what does that mean for me, and what am I going to carry forward into the next part of the journey? Like, and how am I going to address these triggers or traumas that have kind of gotten in my way? And one of the ways to do it is, like, from your class, I learned that day that I wasn't very aware of left-handed things, like all the things, like there's so many accidents that happen a year for left-handed people because of, like, the way they use garden tools. But the way they're made, right?
So they use
that. That's nuts. And so I wear my watch now on my right hand. And most people now think, and it's been since I've had that, so for years, my watch has been on my right hand. I now actually have more capacity to do things with my left hand. So even in that muscle building, right, I'm not only learning to be more aware of things that are not like what I would call normal, I'm also expanding my biases around the things that I've cast judgment on.
Jaton, you just gave us a lot. I want to name one piece and then probably have you back for a whole podcast on it because it's such a huge piece. When you said, and we've talked about this, when you were in my triangles training and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I grew up middle class, because we were talking about the different experience of middle class and poverty. And you were like, no, middle class, check. I've done, oh my gosh. And that speaks to, in the book, in chapter 3, the complexity of the one picture phenomenon. And that, just for our listeners, is what we'll do is we'll take the normalized dominant identities and we'll put them together to get one picture. And then we do the same with the identities that are not normalized dominant. And so what I heard you say is, well, I grew up black, the triangle pointing down. And so the societal system sends a real strong message. Well, then you should be in poverty.
Right.
And you should be all these other triangles pointing down. Right. That, for our listeners, I just want to have you catch that, because that's how powerful the messages in the societal system are. You didn't even live that experience. Yeah. But yet the messages were so strong, you had them to the degree that you got triggered in that training. Yeah. That is going to be a podcast all by itself, listeners, but that's an example of the one picture phenomenon and how strong those messages are. Yeah. And so then for those of us, just to think about listeners, for those of us who hold a lot of normalized dominant triangles, then what messages are being sent to us? And how are we?
Yeah, because we're all under under the same system.
Absolutely. And how it affects how we show up. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Jaton's coming back that's just good. For that alone. Good. Just for that piece. Yeah. But I want to name that and relate it back to the book, and then to be able to unpack that.
Yeah.
And that's good. That's good. And Jaton, I really want to dive more into, now that we understand a little bit more about trauma and triggers, right? And how that shows up in our body, how do you suggest that we apply this to our everyday lives? Yeah. Like, do we have to go spend $1 zillion to?
No, I think you're thinking, do we have to go spend $1 zillion on therapy and training?
Right.
And I'm thinking, do I got to shake like a dog?
Listen, if shaking like a dog works, do it. You don't, it's a both end. You can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get you a great clinician, get you more than one. You should never be with one clinician throughout your entire journey. But partner with some clinicians, and you should. Don't get me wrong, but that can't be where everybody starts. Some people are in this journey further along in their awareness. Some are just beginning in their awareness, and so there has to be some sweet spots. But we can all do some simple things. One, like I wear my watch on my right hand to become more aware of what it's like to be left-handed. Simple, right? And it gives me the power to use my left hand differently now than I have been able to use it before I learned that. Yeah, super simple.
Never thought about that.
Yeah.
Well, and like when you said that you open doors with your left hand sometimes, just to be able to experience how, and you said before that it's awkward at times.
Yeah.
But that simple action keeps that awareness in your daily life. Yeah, where I'm like going, dang, I don't even do that. I use the left-handed, right-handed example all the time, but I ain't applying
Jody, we're going to need you to apply.
I know, but I used to, I'm not going to give you that, the watch, I used to wear it over here, and it was so funny because everybody would remark, oh, you're left-handed, and I'm like, no, I just.
It's a great conversation starter.
Yes.
Yeah. The other things are just, again, still simple. Again, you can go all the way. Don't hurt yourself trying to go right to therapy and solve all things, right? You got to take a journey to understand what things are even tripping you up, right? Yes, things live in our body, but until you learn that something has impacted you in such a way that it's become this repetition or belief, part of your belief system, you've got to learn that happened, right? So like I had to be in that class to realize I still have a problem saying it. I'm middle class, right? There's still something that happens to me because I'm black and I'm woman and I'm queer. To say I'm middle class, like there's a tension point there. But in saying that, you have to exercise with those tension points. So when those tension points come up, say you're at work and somebody says something and your shoulder jiggles a little shimmy. You're like, what's that little shimmy about, right? Journal that for a sec, right? Wherever you're taking notes, right? I had a little shimmy at 2:45 when so-and-so said such and such a thing. Go back and look at that later and try to analyze for yourself what was happening for you. What was your mindset at that moment? How are you in relationship with this person that was giving this message? How much of that is you? How much of you is them? And then where do you need to repair if repair is needed? Repair might only be needed with you. You might need to apologize to yourself. So all things have to start with you. That's good. Right? Before you can go out and give that energy to other people. And just remembering this is a slow baby step race.
That Jaton, when I've been in your presentations, you often start with having people just take deep breaths and check in with their body. And it's so interesting because to see how many people in the audience are just not even comfortable doing that.
Yeah. That's what I was about to say. Yeah. Like, how many adults want to take the time?
That And that's something that and that's partly with the work that you do and being exposed to it, is like, taking this awareness to my body.
Yes.
You know, and how does my body show up? Yeah. And so you asked in one of our trainings, like, okay, where does your body hold its stress? You know, and then how does that show up? Yeah. And so now I'm so much more aware, because I use it, keep it in the forefront. You'd be proud of me. Anytime I catch myself, because I hold mine in my shoulders. And so the other day I was like, oh man, I was like rubbing it. And the minute I rub it now, it's a pause button for me. Yes. What's my body trying to tell me? Perfect. What in the last moments or the last day have I been experiencing that's causing this? You know, did I just sleep wrong, or is it? Yeah. And so just to do that inventory, that's it, is something that I've learned, and definitely with your help, of how my body is actually talking to me, but I did not know it was. Yeah. You know, and as we know in this work, and there's another podcast, so I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but when we don't have awareness of how our body is trying to talk to us, so we don't listen to it, then what we do is we reach for substance. We reach for salty, we reach for sugar, we reach for alcohol, we reach for, but things to numb our body. Yes. And so I have to admit that the more that I'm aware of my body and try to listen to it, the less I have those cravings. Whereas, you know, before it was just, I got off the airplane, you know, and I just flew in from Australia, so I'm going to go have a cocktail, or I'm going to go have a piece of pizza and a cocktail, you know, not even associating it with, it might be that I'm trying to numb my body. Yeah. My body just came off this big trip and is trying to tell me it's under stress. Yeah. But Lord knows I wasn't listening. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, awareness can be liberating.
Yeah.
It can help you discover traumatic retention spots in your body. It can help you become aware of things that you've allowed your body to be arrested to that aren't yours. And what I mean by that is, as we grow up, we're handed down a set of beliefs. And sometimes when our families, my mother, are giving me those beliefs, they felt stressful in the moment because they're just rocket fire. She's in her head, she's trying to keep me safe. Well, those beliefs stay with you. Yes. And they show up differently as you approach and get into adulthood. And if you start doing that self-inventory, you'll start to be able to release yourself from those hand-me-down beliefs they served at a point in time, but may not be supporting you in this current time, and you may not need them in the future. So I call it getting in bed with my awareness is like a joy for me. When I learn something new about myself, I'm literally calling my mom. Yes. You won't believe what I learned about myself today.
And I think it is liberating, but I think before it's scary as hell.
Oh, it's hard. And it's hard.
And it's hard. And
it's so hard.
Because I would much rather just, you know, get off the plane and honestly eat a piece of pizza and drink a whiskey Coke. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Then sit there and take deep breaths and process what that's about.
Let me get aligned.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, this has been an amazing, amazing podcast session. And so, Jody, how do you want to wrap this one up?
I think talking about our capacity has not just to do with awareness. You know, that's the first, you know, getting awareness is the first step. But I like what you said, awareness of the trauma that we may have had and the triggers that we may have, which might be from trauma or just might be, you know, and not understanding someone else's experience, we might get triggered. Yep. And that's held in our body. So we want to start to be aware of how our body is showing up in this awareness journey. That's right. Yeah. And I loved your practical tools, that this isn't a one and done. You know, this is a journey. Yes. And I'm on it every day, all day. And that we can do things intentionally throughout the day. Yes. To remind us of the experience that we don't just naturally have. So as a right-handed person, I can, you know, start using things left-handed, and I can be, you know, start to really look at and become more aware of that in my daily practice. So it keeps the awareness journey at the forefront.
That's right.
Yeah. What do you you got anything to add? Do you think
No, I love it. That was good.
But all of what we talked about today will allow you and I to show up with more capacity.
Absolutely.
And when we show up with more capacity, I think we talked about, that's when we listen to people. That's when we're not reacting to people. And so I want to go back and just finish that is in preparation for this podcast, we were talking about like how we show up. How does our capacity affect those around us in the morning? And I get my child ready in the morning. And sometimes I show up with very low capacity. I'm like, hurry up, we're late, blah, 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 you know. And so today I was like, you know what? I want to show up with my full capacity. And so I woke up early so I could have a couple times, you know, a couple minutes just to meditate, breathe, you know,
get yourself together.
Exactly, get myself together. And then I put on classical music on the phone and I set it on his bed, you know, and I went down and did some laundry. And so I was like, well, that's going to be a good way for him to, you know, slowly wake up. Now, you know, it is my child. So by the time I got up from doing laundry, 8 years old, he knows how to switch it. And he has blaring on my phone, who let the dogs out. But I have to say, intentionally trying to show up with capacity, we had such a great morning this morning. We laughed, we danced. Now think of how that sends him to school.
Yeah.
The teachers are receiving
totally different than yesterday.
Yeah. That's true. It was just yesterday that I did. Yes. That was low capacity. Yes. So I want our listeners, as we think about our capacity and how it impacts people, you know, then how they take that through their day. And that building capacity is not just about awareness, but all the things that Jaton brought to us today.
Right on.
Yeah. That was good. Well, Jaton White, we appreciate you being our guest today.
It was a privilege.
And as we close, this is us building capacity within ourselves, with institutions, and our communities.
You know what?
Thank you all for being with us, and we'll see you soon.